Morning, everybody, and I've gladly accepted the challenge to condense or summarize the political discussion and debates about citizen science with the only result that maybe some arguments or positions may sound harsher than they usually are, but I also have to stress maybe that I'm a representative for NABU, which is the German affiliate of BirdLife International, so I'm presenting from a rather ornithological point of view and integrated land management perspective. If we look at the political debate, we have seen, especially in the EU and extremely in Germany, that things have accelerated in the past couple of years. On the one hand, if we look at nature from a conservation standpoint, we have to admit that we sometimes lack the data that we actually need to conserve species and habitats. On the other hand, most of the data we gather is collected by volunteer scientists and not professional scientists, simply because the resources are lacking in those cases. And of course, you very often have a discussion whether citizen science is second-rate science, and of course our position is it's certainly not. If you look at the history of some scientific disciplines, especially ornithology, for example, which has a history of more than 150 years, arising from volunteers outside of universities, I think it is something we need to discuss. And also, I'd like to stress the point that, of course, we're not looking towards citizen science as a tool to find cheap volunteers who are just working as data collectors for universities. And so we have some conflicts between academia, I would say, and on the other hand, traditional NGOs that have been involved in the field of citizen science decades before the term actually was invented. What are the main discussion points right now? Again, maybe from a German perspective, but I've heard in other countries this situation is arising as well. It is maybe the fear that some academics have that citizen scientists are endangering the environment in which scientists have long been able to obtain scientific funding, and now suddenly with an increase in citizen science, there's also a bigger demand in the participation in science and also in the participation when it comes to the allocation, distribution of funding. So I think this is something that will influence the debate in the future. On the other hand, we also realize that until now, we have very little knowledge about the motivation of citizen scientists. So there's a lot of projects where you engage people, but you still have to do more research in terms of why people get engaged, what are the main motivations. And in those few case studies we have, it's usually the fun people have. So fun comes first, and then scientific objectives come further down the list. And maybe from an academic point of view, this is a different situation. But I think in total, we have more issues that unite us than that actually should separate us. And this is, I think, the discussion lines we should go along with. Why are citizen science projects so important? One issue is that so-called real or proper citizen science projects usually focus on regional or local issues of concern for which there is usually no funding in academia, because research funding does not focus on local conflicts or local issues today. It focuses on rather global perspectives, but also the contribution from a local perspective provides in the end parts of the metadata that's important to solve the global challenges. The volunteers they usually engage bring a lot of intrinsic motivation, and what we are right now also looking at is trying to bridge the gap between, let's say, those people who have knowledge in taxonomy and also the other part of the scientists who have an affinity for digital resources, and usually we find an age gap. There is a lot of, let's say, senior scientists or citizen scientists with a lot of biological knowledge, but usually their affinity towards smartphones and other apps are not as much as we'd like to have in order to collect proper data these days. In the end, the conclusions I have here today is that we, as I said, should look into those issues that unite us in regards to improving conservation and improving the management of habitats, species, and natural resources. The one issue that is usually at stake when it comes to citizen science is that many people neglect that the management of volunteers does require a lot of resources, be it financially or human resources, because volunteers exist, but they do not come for free. And so the perspective that comes from academia sometimes is, oh, you have a lot of volunteers. NABU, for example, has 600,000 members throughout Germany, but the management of those 600,000 people, of which about 40,000 are active volunteers, does require a lot of effort by our organization, and I think this applies to every other organization that is involved in the management of natural resources. So well, I think in the end we have to focus on the symbiotic benefits, and we have to initiate a dialogue at eye level how citizen science can be improved in the future. Thank you.